Good evening and happy National Poetry Month. I'm Savannah Hicks with the University of Arizona Press, and welcome to our event, Danzirly, a reading with Gloria Muñoz, presented by the Academy of American Poets and the University of Arizona Press. Danzirly is a striking bilingual poetry collection that fiercely examines the nuances of the American dream for Latinx people in the United States. With a background of stringent immigration policies, the Me Too movement, and the increasingly tangible threat of climate change, this collection considers multi-generational Latinx identities in a rapidly changing country and world. Through Gloria Muñoz's Colombian American lens, the poems explore the intersections of culture, gender, history, and intergenerational grief. Danzirly is the 2019 recipient of the Academy of American Poets Ambroggio Prize, awarded to poets in their winning Spanish language manuscript translated to English. In 2020, Academy of American Poets and the University of Arizona Press began a partnership to have the press publish all Ambroggio Prize-winning manuscripts with their English translation. This new partnership is part of the Academy of American Poets' ongoing commitment to supporting American poets at all stages of their careers, fostering the appreciation of contemporary poetry and collaborating with other poetry organizations and presses. The University of Arizona Press is a nationally recognized publisher of award-winning works in Latinx and Indigenous literature, and the Ambroggio Prize is a $1,000 publication award given for a book-length poetry manuscript originally written in Spanish with an English translation. Gloria Muñoz is a Colombian American writer and translator. She is also the author of the chapbook Your Biome Has Found You. Her work has won a Lumina Multilingual Award, a New York Summer Writers Fellowship, a Creative Pinellas Grant, and a USF Humanities Poetry Prize. She holds degrees from Sarah Lawrence College and the University of South Florida, and she teaches at Eckerd College. Please welcome Gloria Muñoz.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is so awesome. First, I want to start off by saying thank you, a huge thank you to Savannah for that introduction and for everything, to Mari, to Abby, to Scott, to Deanna, and to everyone who has worked with me on this book from the University of Arizona Press and from poets.org or the Academy of American Poets. This has been such a fantastic ride, and I'm really happy to now be bringing this book into the world with all of you here. Thank you for spending your evening here with me, no matter what time zone you're in. So I'm going to read some poems, and we're going to read in Spanish and English and kind of hop around through the book, and I'll give some background when needed. I'll start at the beginning here, and feel free to use the chat for love because we are using the Zoom stage and it's so bizarre. This first poem, Los Románticos, or The Romantics, is a poem that was written a while back when we had someone running for president who used a lot of terrible rhetoric when talking about people who he thought did not belong in this country. And this rhetoric was full of hate and full of stereotypes, as we all can remember. And it was full of name calling, and it pointed out who was bad and who was good, and who was allowed to be bad and who was allowed to be good. And just hearing that language over and over and over again, as we all did in the news and on our phones and like everywhere, you could not get away from it. At least that was my experience. I thought about myself as a teenager. I thought about my parents, and I thought about who gets to be good and who gets to be bad, especially when you're young, when you should be able to be a little bit good and a little bit bad. And I'll read this one in Spanish first. Los románticos. Estamos trabados y comiendo de todo. Una enorme bolsa de Chex Mix, un tarro de aceitunas. En medio de la cama hay una montaña de envolturas de chocolatines. Nosotros tres, durmiendo en nuestra basura, rebosantes, como ratas del subway después del juego de béisbol. Estamos trabados y comiendo el amanecer, mandarina que consume nuestros hombros paranoicos, mientras nos enteramos uno al otro otra vez, en la arena. Estamos trabados y comiendo la reverberación, el sudor, las armonías emo de la banda. La nicotina se pega a nuestro pelo. Un bajo de miel se derrite a través de nuestros cuerpos. Somos una pila uniforme de pancakes. Estamos trabados y comiéndonos las uñas frente a nuestros padres en misa, en el teatro del colegio, en fiestas y graduaciones. Todos ellos nacieron en otros países. Estamos supuestos a ser mejor que esto. Nos colamos por la ventana de la cocina que sostenemos con una esponja silenciosa. Cada burbuja plateada susurra, sí, sí, sí. Cuando nos deslizamos sobre la lavamanos y entramos a la casa soñolenta. Estamos trabados y comiendo Milk Duds en otro show de medianoche del Matrix. Neo es chévere, pero es un idiota. Nos doblamos como 3 cucharas derretidas alrededor de cada uno. Pretendemos que estamos soñando. Estamos trabados y comiendo de todo con nuestras piernas colgando del muelle. La bioluminiscencia nos trepa las pantorrillas y el humo nos inhala. Brillamos. Brillamos. Nos gustan los románticos y decidimos que no lograremos llegar más allá de los 25. Prometemos casarnos si nos da miedo de todos los demás. Nuestras cabezas descansan en la madera. La noche florece sobre nosotros. The Romantics. We are high and eating everything. A Costco bag of Chex Mix, a jar of olives. There's a mountain of foil between us in bed from mouthfuls of kisses. We 3, asleep on our trash, brimming like subway rats after a baseball game. We are high and eating the tangerine sunrise, consuming our paranoid shoulders as we bury each other again in the sand. We are high and eating amp feedback, sweat, the band's emo harmonies. Nicotine sticks to our hairs, the syrupy bass pours through us. We're a uniform stack of buttermilk pancakes. We are high and eating our fingernails in front of our parents at mass, school plays, holidays, and graduation. They were all born in other countries. We're supposed to be better than this. We sneak into the kitchen window, we prop open with a silent sponge. Each silver soap bubble hushes, see, 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 as we slide over the sink and into the slumbering house. We are high and eating Milk Duds at another midnight screening of The Matrix. Neo is dope, but idiotic. We bend like 3 melting spoons around each other, pretend we are dreaming. We are high and eating everything with our legs hanging off the jetty. Bioluminescence climbs our calves as smoke inhales us. Aglow, we're into the romantics. And we decide we won't make it past 25. We promise to marry each other if we're too afraid of everyone else. Our heads rest on the dock. Night looms over us. I'm a Virgo, so I tabbed everything in order. Here, I'm going to shift gears a little bit in this poem. There's a lot of poems. Poetry books take a long time to write. They're short, but they take a long time to write, years. And it's really wild to see how poems resonate and kind of reverberate through times and themes that were relevant when I was writing them, maybe 2-3 years ago, maybe even a year ago, seems so immediate and so present. This next poem is called Hieroglyphico, and I'm going to read it in Spanish and I'm going to read it in English. El antiguo símbolo de un abrazo en las paredes de cuevas egipcias se parece a un nido de líneas que se acurrullan, una más torcida que la otra, una más amorfa. Para resolver nuestros problemas de desconexión, el gobierno distribuirá capas que se llenan de aire para simular un abrazo a cada persona solitaria. Hieroglyphic. The ancient symbol for embracing found on the walls of Egyptian caves resembles a nestling of lines, one more crooked than the other, one more shapeless. To solve our modern day disconnectedness, the government will distribute coats that fill with air to simulate a hug to every lonely person in the country. This next poem is written in a form. Yeah, I'm going to go here next. Okay, I'm looking at my list here. That's where I'm going to go next. This next poem is written in a form, and it's a glossa. It's a Spanish form. I had a really wonderful mentor who had us dive into forms. We had to do like deep research on a form, and I chose a glossa, and it's a form in which you choose 4 lines and you kind of daisy chain one of those 4 lines at the end of each sonnet. So each sonnet ends in one of these 4 lines, and my 4 lines are from Dana Levin's Banana Palace, which if you haven't read, I highly, 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 highly recommend. It's a beautiful book. And these are those 4 lines, and then I'll jump right into the poem. And this one's going to be in English. I think about you a lot, future person, how you will need all the books that were ever read when the screens and wires go dumb. Despite the constant urge to stick all branches in my mouth, to keep a humming terranium inside me, to bend close and dig harder, I can't help but sense the rotting. I think about you a lot, future person. What happens when the rooting powder doesn't work its magic? When everything is bonsai or encased in glass? You'll confuse ancient roots with tripping wire. What a minefield we'll have left. Oh, how you will need. We'll also leave you a clusterfuck of concrete and other impenetrable matter. Things built with immortality in mind, sundials, bridges, monuments, tombstones. Don't mind the rubble of the present inked on your forearm. Can't remember where you read it, but it's stuck. You'll spend most of your life trying to remember, searching in all the books that were ever read. You'll hear about us, of the age of information and the age of experience when we tried to hold onto every moment through our phone cameras. I don't know how you'll feel connected when the screens and the wires go dumb. Thanks for the love in the chat. It's lovely. I'm imagining that we're all in a room together sharing poetry. This next one is dedicated to my family, my mom's side of the family, who I was surrounded by as when I grew up. We threw these epic parties, Christmas, New Year's. There's a lot of traditions. There's a lot of Colombian traditions that go into parties. There's a lot of family traditions that just they make us who we are. And I'll read this one in Spanish and in English. Por si las moscas. Puedes llamarlo superstición. Adultos corriendo alrededor de la manzana con equipaje para asegurar el viaje, o enterrando dinero y desenterrándolo antes de medianoche, todos nosotros en cucos amarillos, ferozmente tragando 12 uvas antes del año nuevo. Pero no lo es. Estas son las tendencias que nos hacen. El guiño de la telaraña en que estamos atrapados, como moscas, hipnotizadas por si las moscas. Estamos preparados para cualquier cosa. Por si las moscas. And this translates literally for non-Spanish speakers out there. Yeah, pachanga, yes, totally. Party family on both sides. Party family in the US, party family in Colombia. If we all got together, I feel like the world might shut down. This is, por si las moscas literally translates to in case of the flies, which only makes sense in Spanish. I don't know why, it only makes sense in Spanish. It's in case of the flies, we got to be ready, right? I'm going to pack this extra thing. It's why my family took and takes like 25 years to pack to go to the beach. Let's throw it all together. Let's get it all in there in the bag, everything that you can think of in case of the flies, just in case, who knows why, in case. Okay, so here's a poem in English. Por si las moscas. You can call it superstition, adults running around the block with luggage to ensure travel, or burying money and digging it up before midnight, all of us in yellow underwear, ferociously swallowing 12 grapes before the new year. But it isn't. These are the ticks that make us. A nod to the web we're caught in, like hypnotized flies. Por si las moscas. We're prepared for anything. Okay, and we're moving into the world of myth for a little bit, the world of myth and storytelling and lore. I love La Llorona as a symbol, La Llorona as a feminist icon, a feminist myth. It's one that she runs across like multiple Latin American communities, and it's you ask somebody from Mexico, you ask somebody from Colombia, they're going to have their own take on La Llorona, which I think is really fascinating. And this poem is called Llorona. all the public places I've cried. Airports, beaches, parking lots. So many. Waiting rooms, parks, train platforms, beaches. Whose loss is shed? The bluish distillate in Rilke's saucerless cup was watered down with tears to be more bearable. In this morning's coffee, tears dissolve like comets into darkness. If I need a good cry, I watch that astronaut singing Major Tom playing his guitar. Astronaut tears are jello. Even this physics makes my heart confetti. You're too emotional, you said, as my eyes irrigated the flower beds. In India, Colombia, Chile, Japan, and the Philippines, you can still hire a professional mourner. Crying in public ought to be easier. Designated trees or hilltops might help. Or an hour of tears where we can all howl in unison and then return to our diluteness, dailiness. Crying is inevitable when headlines read like requiems. When Xiuhcoatl prophesied the conquest of Mexico, all she could do was cry. So I have a series of poems in here that envision women in pop culture and in media and in politics and in history as Latinas. And this series was born from seeing a woman run for president, which was awesome. If everybody can remember, holy shit, we had a woman run for president. And she was the epitome of what a woman running for president should be. She was white. She had a history in politics. She had a lot of connections, a lot of money behind her, all of the things. Yet she was dragged through the mud. And I was driving from Florida to New Orleans, and I saw all of these billboards, these wild billboards demonizing this woman running for president in the most heinous ways. And I thought, well, what if she was Latina? What would happen then? And this is where the series was born from. So I have a few different ones, and I'm going to read Latina Hillary. Latina Hillary wants to shout, "Sí, se puede," from the podium, but she's too afraid her ratings will plunge, so she purses her lips between sentences and posts only photos of maple trees, though inside she's all palmas and papayas. She wears navy and white. She reins in her accent, undoes the echo in her R's, eats granola and yogurt behind sunglasses, gets blonder highlights because polls say her hair's too ratty. A recent focus group called it witchy. She obliges for the ratings, though the bleach makes her hair fall out and now she has to wear a wig. The media calls it her helmet. She just isn't warm enough, like Latinas should be, someone tweets from Utah. She develops a twitch and has to go into tanning beds to scream beneath a canopy of 220-watt bulbs. She persists in her day-glow skin and white suits and pleads to La Virgen de Guadalupe each night on her Bible Belt tour. Billboards display her as a bombastic dragoness. She has too much bite, a man tweets from Virginia. Too much fire. She ices up with Botox and presses sapphires into her brown eyes. They flash open backstage before the big debate. White light bounces off of her white suit and she strides through the fog and blaring to the podium. Her shadow, long and lean, is extraterrestrial. Okay, so we're gonna switch gears once again here. I have a very, very special guest I'd like to invite to the Zoom stage for these next 3 poems. This is a person who has always encouraged me to write, no matter how zany or outlandish this path can be. He is my first proofreader. He is often my first reader. When I was very, very pregnant, but I wanted to submit my manuscript to the Ambroggio Prize, which a friend told me about. And I was like, this is perfect. I need to send this manuscript in. This person sat with me at a local pizzeria for hours so I could eat pizza while we proofread my manuscript together one last time before sending it in. He's also the inspiration for the titular poem of the collection. I'd like to welcome my dad, Al Muñoz, proofreader extraordinaire, maker of adjectives, and a poet in his own right. Again, I'm going to be reading the poem in English first. So I'll be reading in English, then he'll be reading in Spanish. And I'll just say this because my parents are notorious for unmuting themselves on Zoom. Dad, mute yourself for now and then come on after I read the poem in English, okay? We're gonna get through this. Okay, here we go. Narwhals are real. Narwhals are real, a student announces, proclaims on a February Tuesday, leading to a week-long deep dive of researching you, Narwhal, horned and mystical depth dweller. I haven't thought too much about until now. One-toothed wonder. You whirl open to devour prey whole. I would expect nothing less. On the internet, you have a cult following, unicorn of the sea. You're crocheted into one-horn beanies, printed on t-shirts and mugs and phone cases, tattooed across backs. There's a plushie of you with a mustache and a monocle, a beanbag chair, an enamel pin, night slippers, and meme after meme after meme after meme after meme. Your eyes are always wide, kind. A blogger I stumbled upon has "I am obsessed with narwhals" as the first line of her bio. And how could we not be? In this month of love, I'll call this a Valentine, narwhal. In Inuit, your name means the one point to the sky. This month, we launched the heaviest rocket into outer space. As I watched the slow burn of the descending boosters, I thought of you, narwhal. How your horn is a needle on a record skipping heartbeats. How your pulse plummets as you swirl into that Arctic dark. Now I'll turn it over to my pa.
Los narvales existen. Un estudiante anuncia. proclama un martes en febrero, mandándome en una semana entera de inmersión en investigación de ti, narval, cornudo y místico habitante de la profundidad, sobre el cual hasta ahora no he pensado mucho. Fenómeno monodentado, te devanas para devorar a tu presa entera. Espero nada menos de ti. En el internet tienes un seguimiento de culto, unicornio del mar, tejido en una gorra con cuerno, imprimido en camisetas, tazas y estuches de teléfonos, tatuado en espaldas. Hay un peluche de ti con un bigote y un monóculo, una silla, saco de semillas, un alfiler de esmalte, zapatillas de noche y meme, después de meme, después de memes de ti. Tus ojos son siempre grandes y generosos. Una bloguera que encontré tiene: estoy obsesionada con narvales, como la primera frase de su bio. ¿Y cómo no estarlo? En este mes del amor voy a llamar este poema un Valentín, narval. En Inuit, tu nombre significa el punto al cielo. Este mes lanzamos la nave más pesada al espacio exterior. Mientras veía el lento arder de los impulsores descendiendo, pensé en ti, narval, cómo tu cuerno es una aguja en un disco saltando latidos del corazón. Cómo se desploma tu pulso mientras arremolinas en el oscuro Ártico.
Gracias, Beth. All right. So the next one up is, this poem is written about something that happened in 1948, which, despite all the face creams of the world, I was not alive back then, but it's a poem that looks at how we study history, intergenerational trauma, what's passed down through lineage and through storytelling. And again, we were talking about things reverberating earlier, how those things kind of live in our bones, whether or not we were there. There's bits of history that are passed down, that are kept and carried. This poem is about a time period in Colombia that was excruciatingly violent and terrible. There was a civil unrest and a civil war called La Violencia, which translates to the violence. And it's written in the voice, as a persona poem, it's written in the voice of my father's father as a letter to my dad. Okay, so I'll read it first and then we'll switch over to my dad. The night they shot Gaithan, April 9th, 1948. My left arm throws a Molotov cocktail, ragwick torn from my mother's apron. Quick lit, it roars and rages, a fit of pastel flowers. Ash rinds our faces. We are all young and old at once under moonlight. Everything smells of garlic, streets, guns, my mother's hands, rocks, clubs, chains, machetes, machetes, machetes. Men shuffle and spin in unison. If I close my eyes, their crying sounds like laughter. If I close my eyes, ash is stardust, raining baptismal. How it wicks blood from our necks. Against my chest, a dangling silver heart, ablaze and stabbed by a miniature dagger. A wrapped mint from church melts cool against a pocket seam somewhere. A child on fire runs, flesh dripping, wails for her brother. If I close my eyes, this night is a diorama in a cardboard box layered with sediment and laced with foil to show the telluric current reaching towards our feet like lightning, but upside down. We are all good and evil under moonlight. If I do not speak, it's because I do not want to remember. Son, one day you'll have a daughter. She will grow, love, leave, and never know. The night they shot Gaithan, what really happened?
La noche que mataron a Gaitán. Mi brazo izquierdo lanza un molotov cóctel con la mecha arrancada del delantal de mi mamá. Ruge y rabia en un ataque de flores rosadas. La ceniza encascara nuestras caras. Todos somos jóvenes y viejos a la vez bajo la luz de la luna. Todo huele a ajo. Las calles, las armas, las manos de mi mamá, piedras, palos, palancas, machetes, machetes, machetes. Los hombres piruetean y giran al unísono. Si cierro los ojos, su llanto suena como una risa. Si cierro los ojos, la ceniza es polvo de estrellas que llueve bautismalmente. ¿Cómo absorbe la sangre de nuestros cuellos? Contra mi pecho cuelga un corazón de plata en llamas, apuñalado por una pequeña daga. Una menta envuelta se derrite contra la costura de un bolsillo. Una niña encendida corre desencarnada, llora por su hermano. Si cierro los ojos, esta noche es un diorama en una caja de cartón con capas de sedimento y encaje de aluminio que muestra las corrientes telúricas que llegan a nuestros pies como un relámpago, pero al revés. Todos somos buenos y malos bajo la luz de la luna. Si no hablo es porque no quiero recordar. Hijo, un día tendrás una hija. Ella crecerá, amará y te dejará y nunca sabrá en la noche que mataron a Gaitán lo que realmente pasó.
Gracias. And this will be the third one that we'll be doing together, and then we'll switch back to me. Contrapuntal is this next one, and this is a poem that was written when there was a lot of stuff in the news, which I feel is constant, but this was a particularly trying time. There was a lot involving water that kept, coming up in the news, water and our relationship to water. I feel like the more we think about water, the more we know that it's going to be everything to us. Contrapuntal. There is like here when we're all defending water. Here is like there because we're sinking. Night is like day when a chant is a prayer. Day is like night when birds wash up in oil. Wet is like dry when the scream stays in your throat. Dry is like wet when water protectors are sprayed with pressure. New is like old when there's lead in the water. Old is like new when smokestacks smudge out the stars. Up is like down when regret is an endless nesting doll. Down is like up when the drilling starts.
Contrapuntar. Allá es como acá, cuando todos estamos defendiendo el agua. Acá es como allá, porque nos estamos hundiendo. La noche es como el día, cuando un canto es una oración. El día es como la noche, cuando los pájaros se manchan en aceite. Mojado es como seco, cuando el grito se atasca en tu garganta. Seco es como mojado, cuando amenazamos a los protectores del agua con agua a presión. Lo nuevo es como lo viejo, cuando hay plomo en el agua. Lo viejo es como lo nuevo, cuando las chimeneas borran a las estrellas. Arriba es como abajo, cuando el arrepentimiento es una interminable muñeca rusa. Abajo es como arriba, cuando la perforación comienza.
Gracias, Beth. Thank you so much. Totally awesome. I see that you also tabbed your poems. The apple doesn't fall too far from the tree there. Thank you so much. Yes, show him lots of love in the chat and with the Zoom things that you can do. Like I said earlier, a lot of things can happen in the time that you write a poem or a book. When I started this poem, I was not a mother. I was very, very, very on the fence as someone who's constantly thinking about global warming. Yeah, it's a tough decision. It's a big decision. And this poem is about that reckoning. And it was written in the parking lot of a Walgreens. It started in the parking lot of a Walgreens. So if you can just like imagine that Walgreens logo throughout this poem, that'll help you out, I think. Signals. Every mother stitches her children out of superstitions. We decide this as we talk about pregnancy under Walgreens's incandescence. That W, more balloon animal than letter, loops up, embraces itself, and presents its fullness. A totem, stone fertility goddess, headless and full-bodied. These signals catch me more frequently these days. The curve of a grapefruit, the rev of an engine, peonies, aquarium seahorse, a quarter ridge, a quarter slot, my neighbor's wind chimes, blue jay, a swollen tea bag, morning shower steam, malachite mound on my nightstand, your guttural snoring, anything in bloom. I am collecting them, listening closely, waiting for a voice to reach through time to say, ready. I grew up with a mother who sought signals from everything. This Thanksgiving again, my childlessness is on the table, wedged between the canned beets and empanadas. My molars crush the butter and salt from the Brussels sprouts. I add this popping of leafy heads to my list. I've known the names of my unborn children for years, yet saying them aloud feels elegiac. When I'm confronted with having a child, I think of the latest National Geographic centerfold of ice floes detached from an iceberg, lost in the continuously dissolving world. I keep collecting the shape of tea leaves, rain clouds, crease lines my hand makes when it's balled into a fist, meaning maybe my body is meant to carry only my ocean. We have a big problem in this country, as we see on the news again and again, with shootings and with killing people because of the color of their skin. And this poem was written after the 2019 shooting in El Paso, in a Walmart in El Paso, which was a racially charged act of terrorism. And I'll read it in Spanish and English. And I just have a few more poems here. And it combines the very early days of motherhood, it was written at the tail end of like the very hazy days of being a new mom, where like everything melts. And it's about a reflex that babies have, that kind of, they jump up. They kind of do this like body jerky movement called the startle reflex, or a reflejo de sobre resalto in Spanish. Cuando lloras, lloro. Cuando comes, como. Cuando duermes, leo las noticias. Un tiroteo, un tiroteo, un tiroteo y luego otro. Niños atrapados en campamentos fronterizos todavía. Los niños morenos, los pistoleros blancos, tus ojos azules como los de tu padre. Se volverán cafés como los míos, como los de mi madre, como los de su madre y como los de todas las madres que nos hicieron. Cuando la bandera está a media asta, nunca es para estos cuerpos. Como nuevos americanos, mis padres envolvieron a sus hijas en cobijitas y pensaron seguro, safe, seguro, sure. Cuando te canto en español estoy rezando. Cuando estás llena, tu cabeza gira hacia atrás, tu brazo se abre como una ala. Startle reflex. When you cry, I cry. When you eat, I eat. When you sleep, I read the news. A shooting, a shooting, a shooting, and then another. Children trapped in border camps. Still. The children, brown. The gunmen, white. Your eyes, blue, like your father's. Will they turn brown like mine, like my mother's and her mother's, and all the mothers that made us? When the flag is at half-mast, it is never for these bodies. As new Americans, my parents wrapped their daughters in cobijitas and thought, safe, seguro, seguro, sure. When I sing to you in Spanish, I am praying. When you're full, your head rolls back, your arm flings open like a wing. And I'm going to stay on this topic momentarily. And I'll read this one in both languages as well. Just so people who are in other countries speaking Spanish can wrap their heads around the big problem that we have here. El oso. La niña de 6 años me cuenta sobre el simulacro de la escuela. Cómo la alfombra le tallaba las palmas, cómo le picaba las rodillas, cómo olía a orines y cereal debajo del escritorio, cómo empezó a cantar, pero fue rápidamente silenciada por no se puede cantar cuando llegue el oso. Sí, llega. Hubiera sido una mejor opción de palabras. El oso tiene dientes y garras. El oso quiere cenar. Sí, llega el oso. Muchos de estos niños nunca han visto un oso, pero saben que podrían conocer a uno en cualquier momento y saben que se tienen que volver más silenciosos, más pequeños. The bear. The 6-year-old tells me about the drill at school. How the carpet imprinted bumps in palms and knees and made them itchy. How it smelled like pee and cereal under the desk. How she started singing, but was quickly silenced by, "No, there's no singing when the bear comes." If would have been a better word choice. The bear has teeth and claws. The bear is out for dinner. If the bear comes, many of these children have never seen a bear, but they know they could meet one at any minute, and they know to become quieter, smaller. And I'm going to read 2 more poems. In this penultimate poem, I encourage you all to think about, it's been a year of loss. It's been a horrendous year of loss. If you've lost somebody, or if someone is very far from you, and if this somebody is someone who changed your life or inspired you or just made you feel alive, I encourage you to hold that person in your mind, in your heart, wherever you want. Just hold space for them. This poem, Morning Flight, is dedicated to a composer, Johan Johansson, who still is the composer who I write to. He's the soundtrack to most of my books, poetry, fiction, whatever, essays. He has scored my writing for over a decade. And he recently passed away a few years ago. Morning Flight. Terminals B through D at LaGuardia smell like caraway seeds. People balance phones and everything bagels and search for an outlet. Under this coat, my t-shirt is wrinkled and my overpacked carry-on won't stay upright, so it's wedged between my sneaker heels. I've spilled coffee into my right sleeve twice. I'm wrapped in light because of the buzzing fluorescence and the platonic shades used for public spaces. And how as they land, planes are mostly flashes because the old backlit couple seated across from me looks translucent, their edges soft between them. The drowned world seeps in from oversized headphones and fills me with scattered water and sun. You've scored my writing days for so long. And I wanted to thank you by writing a poem that translates light the way your compositions do. I'm still working on that poem. The week after you died, I attended a lighting for film workshop where the instructor opened by saying, if you want to learn about light, you must first understand shadow. And I'm going to end here with the title poem of the book, Danzirly or Danzirly, depending on what language you are reading in. Danzirly. Winding through titanic red rocks. I'm 14. It's the first road trip my family's ever taken. It's attached to a funeral. Claro, my mom repeats at every stop. At every merge, por Dios. We drive from Florida to Colorado in a van with no AC. It's July. These vacaciones, I want to show you this country, my father says, America. The word fills the air with fable and triumph. I came here with nothing but a bag full of books, jobless. You know, I learned English from the radio, country music. My sister turns up her Walkman and I groan at the thought of listening to country music for the next 9 hours. This is your country, he exclaims, as if announcing it to the valleys when we stop at a lookout. He sermonizes to bronze statues at rest stops, fields of open sunflowers, the majesty of purple mountains, rivers, bridges, and patches of antennas and wind turbines. Oh, say, can you see by the Danzirly light? Yes, Danzirly. When learning the anthem, he claimed this adjective as the most glorious exclamation in the English language. He greeted strangers at the grocery store with, what a Danzirly day. The afterglow of sunsets, Danzirly, the trailing of hysterical laughter, Danzirly, a pelican's wingspan, a coupon mailer, gliding a knife on a new tub of butter, all Danzirly. He now knows it's dawn's early, but on this road trip, it's a mystical compound. We attend the funeral, bagpipes, tears, estranged family glances. Back on the road, he continues, for the land of the free and the home of the, driving too slowly at every speed trap. After 22 years in this country, he's still afraid of cops. We've rehearsed the protocol just in case. Act over patriotic. Smile. He continues talking like a loro mojado, as my mother says. The drive back is full of stories of factories he's worked in. He glosses over discrimination. This is your country, he repeats. In the accent I watched people imitate and smirk at, electing to speak to me instead of my parents. You are American, he says, not naively, but brazenly grateful to live under this dawn's early sky. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gloria. That was absolutely incredible. And thank you so much, Al, for joining us. I'm so glad you were able to be here. That is so cool. It was so nice to hear you reading your daughter's work. I love that so much. So thank you. I want to move us into the Q&A section of the event tonight. So if anyone has questions, please post them in the chat. The chat's kind of going a little crazy right now, so I'm going to have to parse it out. But I'm going to start with a question of my own, and it's about translation. I'd love to hear about your experience with translating your own work and hear about the transformations your poems went through. What did they gain or lose? Like, how did that experience of translating your own work impact your poems, and what did that look like for you?
Such a good question. It's funny because language across cultures and across places and across communities changes so much for me. I'm thinking a lot about my daughter here and how she's learning language and how, you know, we're teaching her made-up words that are going to become part of her vocabulary, which for better or for worse will become part of her vocabulary. But she also is learning Spanish, and she's also learning English, and she will say sentences with both kind of jumbled together. And I think for me, a lot of translation and the translation process is that it's a lot of jumbling and mixing together. It's a lot of thinking in both languages. Some of these poems started in Spanish, some of them started in English, some of them started in Spanglish. Like, honestly, it's difficult to separate. When I'm trying to figure something out with writing, especially in poetry, but more and more with essays also, when I'm writing in the lyric essay form especially, I tend to turn to Spanish. There's something about the way images are constructed, the way that it's the language of metaphors. Honestly, we speak in metaphors, por si las moscas. What the hell does that mean to anybody else? We're the language of 1,000 metaphors and nicknames and renamings and restructuring. So when I'm trying to figure something out, I always look at language and how it can help. Yeah, and this was really a fun process because I wrote so many versions of these poems, building it, taking it apart, starting the book over. It just, in the end, I feel like it was written in both, from both, of both, together.
Thank you. I loved hearing you talk about the metaphor, the in case of the flies. I thought that was just so interesting and fun, because I hadn't heard of that before. We have a question from Virginia Clark, who is asking, who were your biggest influences and favorite poets?
So I'm going to be really honest here and say that some of my greatest influences and greatest poets are wildly the people that the press was able to get to write blurbs for my book. It still blows my mind. Richard Blanco, phenomenal. Jay Hopler, Raquel Salas Rivera, Suzanne Gardenier, Jeffrey McDaniel, Mina Loy. I love Mina Loy's work. She's no longer with us, but I feel like she is possibly somehow. Miguel Hernandez is another big inspiration for me, especially when I'm thinking of translation. Jorge Salamea is a Colombian poet. If you're a new poetry writer, or if you're a seasoned poetry writer, wherever you're at, I encourage you to read super broadly, contemporary, old, read in other languages. I love Persian poetry. I love Agha Shahid Ali. There's so many phenomenal poets around the world. And luckily we have more and more people translating. So we're able to read poems from all around the world. So I encourage you to read wide, read super wide.
We have a question from Jamieson Lindenberg that's asking, hi, Gloria. After this heavy year, what gives you hope? And what are the little things that continue to inspire you and lift you up?
Hi, Jameson. Great question. Oh my gosh, the arts through this pandemic, they have been everything. I have so many friends who are artists who have lost their jobs, who have lost their healthcare, who have lost loved ones just because of having to work in various kind of frontline positions. But this time, which has been really dark for everyone, has shown me how much the arts matter, how much artistic communities matter, how much they're taken for granted. I haven't fully processed how I want to be more of an advocate for artists, but I know that it's something that I want to do. Like I keep writing ideas down, like what can be done, because yeah, we need the arts. They're intrinsic to who we are. So I think art in general has been the number one thing that has been my inspiration. Art of all kinds, artists finding creative ways to connect. Shout out to Ratatouille the musical, which blew my mind. Yeah, I think arts are what give me hope right now, across every field. Great question, Jameson.
We have a question from Caitlin Morris asking, do you start with an idea or theme and then sit down to write? Or do you just start writing when you have a stroke of inspiration and find the themes as you go?
Hi, Caitlin. Thank you for that question. I start a lot with, it's kind of like an idea that won't leave me. It's just like a little like seedling of an idea. It can be an image, it can be a line of dialogue that I'm like, somebody says this, somebody, I don't know who, maybe in the past or the present or the future, somebody has said this line or will say this line in the sort of space and time continuum. So I either have that snippet of dialogue or that something I just hear, or it's an image. Or sometimes it's a conundrum, like why the hell are we killing people? Like, why are we shooting each other? I do not understand this. I will never understand this. I will die not understanding this. Therefore, I will write about it probably more and more. I think it was possibly Richard Hugo, I could be wrong, who said that poets write the same poem over and over again. And I think that anytime there's an inspiration for a poem, it's something I've revisited. It's something that I'm revisiting. It's something that I've maybe written about before, but through a different angle. So I think those big things, those big questions that are difficult for me to grasp as a human, those are the things that I keep coming towards. So sometimes I'll be like, oh my gosh, this image reminds me of X, reminds me of being a new mom, reminds me of language, reminds me of history and intergenerational trauma. I need to start a poem there. So it really depends. And it's just like, I write a lot off the page. I write a lot in my head. I encourage my students to do this too, you're always writing. If you're a writer, you're observing the world and you're writing. It's hard to turn it off. I think it's almost impossible to turn it off. So keep a notebook, keep your voice notes on your phone or whatever you want to do. And just observe, like look at the world. And then whenever you're inspired, just jot something down. Yeah, Colombia is definitely a main inspiration, because it's this thing that I know, but that I don't know at the same time.
Absolutely. I always wonder how many poems are lost, just walking down the road and you're thinking constantly and crafting these lines, but you aren't, you can't write them down. So I think the voice notes is a good way to kind of capture those thoughts. Alyssa Ramos is asking, how do you balance writing poetry and kidlit novels? How do you divide your time?
Poetry, thanks, Alyssa. Hi, Alyssa. Thank you. Poetry for me takes a lot of time. It takes me a long time to write a poem. These are super economic and small on the page. Most of my poems are 1 to 2 pages, maybe 3 at most, but they take months oftentimes to draft. I very rarely draft a poem in like one sitting, or I do, but it's the world's worst poem. And then I need to work on it again and again and again and again. So the poems are for me like the air. It's like always happening. And I'm collecting them and keeping them and thinking about them and stashing them and coming back to them whenever I can. Whereas YA and middle grade and kidlit novels in general, fiction, I work on adult novels through middle grade. They are maps to me. They make sense. They're worlds that exist. And like, I am trying to think about setting, like once I lay out the blueprint for that world and its characters and all of, its climate and all of its essentials, then I know like that world exists here and I'm going to dive into this story and work on it. And it's a little more linear, whether it's a linear story or not. For me, it's a little more linear. So I try to, in terms of balancing time, I find my way into prose a little bit easier because I'm like following this sort of map that I have most of the time. And then poetry just doesn't leave me alone. So I just keep writing. I just keep trying to figure out how to work with it. And it's, again, I think that's like the ongoing, there's like a poem here, whereas novels, I just kind of work on, I try to create a schedule for myself, a writing schedule, and set some targets for myself, although I'm working on becoming gracious with my time as well.
We have another question from Virginia Clark asking, how did you start?
I started at home. I started writing when I was really little. I actually had a nightstand in my room and I would write sometimes on it with like marker and pencils. Like I didn't like think like writing or my writing, whatever I was writing, I didn't like think it worthy of like putting in a notebook. And I didn't know that was like a thing that people did. But I had these ideas for stories. Like I knew people wrote books, but I could not figure out like if these people were like real human beings, like what they were. Like I just didn't make that connection. Like, oh no, people do this for a living. Like people figure out how to do this. So anyway, when I was younger, really young, I would write on this dresser. Like it was like a white, like glossy, like super, like had like a laminate on it dresser, and I would write on it. It was like beige color. I would write on it, and my parents one day kind of noticed that I was like now using Sharpie and like pencil and like doing all these things. And that's when I got my first notebook from my parents. They were like, please stop writing on your furniture. And here's a notebook, write in this thing. And yeah, it's weird. That's one of my earliest memories. I don't even know if my parents remember it. It's one of my earliest memories of just being given a notebook and knowing like, okay, oh my gosh, I can write on paper. I can write on this thing. Like these stories, they could be actual stories. So I started then, and then I just kept writing. I loved it. I wrote songs for a long time. I write songs now with my partner, who's a really wonderful musician and songwriter. Yeah, it just stayed with me.
I love that, writing on the furniture. We have a question from Yasmin Venegas. Do you think Chicano literature is well appreciated in the United States?
Not yet. I think presses like the University of Arizona Press make it so that it is more visible. There's a few other presses out there who are working hard to do the same. But I don't think fully, no, not yet. I think we sensationalize Chicano and Latinx literature in a way that's really a disservice to the canon. I think of like the giants in in history, in literary history, who are from Chicano lit or Latinx lit, or or indigenous literature, and we pick one or two and we're like, you are it. They're often male, and they're often already bestsellers, and I think that there's a lot of work to be done. Yeah, that's a really great question.
I have a question for you that I wrote down. Danzirly uncovers the pride and pain that many immigrants feel as they navigate America and raise new generations here. How do the ideas of assimilation, performance, and discrimination shape your poetry?
There's a really wonderful book, Minor Feelings. Has anybody read this, Minor Feelings? I think it's by Kathy Park Hong. I'm going to double check because I want to shout out the right person here. Yeah, got it right. Minor Feelings is a book that I'm reading, and I'm just like seeing, so it's about an Asian American experience, and about feeling kind of like your experience, your perception of the world and of who you are because you're from somewhere else, or because your family is from somewhere else. Like it's less, and like you've been sort of gaslit into believing that you are a version of yourself that you aren't. And it really scrutinizes, and thankfully, wonderfully scrutinizes that othering that is constantly happening. You can't get away from it. It's such tricky territory, and and I'm speaking from my point of view, where I've had all kinds of bizarre things happen, terrible, weird things happen, and I'm a lighter skinned Latina. I have people in my family who are much darker skinned, and they have unimaginable crap that they deal with on the daily. So I think you can't get away from it. I think there's so many things at play, whether it's colorism, whether it's history, whether it's identity, whether it's just straight up racism. So you just learn to live with it. You can't get away with it, so you learn to live with it, for lack of a better, understanding of it. Yeah, I've always been cognizant of the two cultures that I'm a part of. I've been cognizant of how I operate in them, of when I feel not enough of one, like I'm not enough of the other, etc. And you just strike that fine balance. So a lot of these poems, I think, deal with that, like this wanting to kind of shape into and morph into, but also knowing that you cannot and will not, and that you just fit in between. And that you are named and labeled and othered, but you also begin to kind of do it to yourself. So the poems live in all of those spaces.
I have one final question for you. It's Danzirly features poems about the disconnection caused by the internet and by the state of society in general. To pull from your poem Hieroglyphic, the government will distribute coats that fill with air to simulate a hug to every lonely person in the country. How do you think this disconnection has been amplified during the pandemic, and how do you see it shaping your poetry in the future?
Yes, I mean, it's like time traveling, honestly, writing and then reading something you wrote. years ago and thinking about it, especially hieroglyphics, which you mentioned, and a lot of the other poems in the collection deal with just how we connect with each other, how we fail to connect with each other, and with our environment. I'm very interested in eco-poetics and in sort of this sense of understanding that we think we have of the earth, which we know very little about. And the same could be said for people, right? We think we know people around us, but we don't really. We know the versions of them that we want to present to ourselves. We know the versions of them that we consume via social media or via whatever they present. Same with the earth, right? We have this sort of colonialist mentality with the planet where we're like, this is ours, this is our place. It belongs to us, it should change as we change, etc. It wants that, right? Animals too, we have the same relationship to animals, and it's totally bizarre how humans, we're very self-centric, and that makes us lonely. I think at the end of the day, that makes us separated and just a little more alone. And this time period, my gosh, the pandemic has pointed out so many divisions, so many disparities. It's shown how those who have are okay, like they float along, and those who don't really, really have to sort of claw their way to hold on to reality and to this life. So yeah, I think that I'll never stop writing that poem. I'll never stop looking at how we connect with each other and how we connect with the world that we're a part of for some, freakish reason. And it just so happens that this poem was published. I never in a million years thought that this poem would be published during a pandemic. It's oddly, looking at everybody here, I'm so happy to share this with you all, but I never thought this would be in this format. And seeing this all now, I feel like it was meant to be in this format in some, bizarre, odd way. Like these poems very much speak to what we're going through right now and what we're experiencing.
Okay, we have one more question from Alvaro. What inspired you por si los moscas?
Hi, Tio Alvaro from Colombia. I'm so happy you're here. Everything inspires me that I care, things that I care about inspire me. Things that I have a sort of bone to pick with, the things that keep me up late at night inspire me. People inspire me. Yeah, music. Oh my gosh, music. Something I learned from my YA and kidlit friends, and just like this amazing community of writers that, because of the pandemic, I found like all these kidlit writers online who I'm now friends with, and like we have text threads and we work together, and I'm just like, my mind is blown by this community, and they inspire me. They taught me about like creating playlists for when you're writing, and I'm like, well, not like my playlist of Johan Johansson that I always have playing, but like full on just like fun pop, like get in the mood playlists. So people who are gracious, people who are giving and generous inspire me. Yeah, it's inspiration's everywhere. I think I tell my students all the time, I'm like, don't look always at yourself, like look out from yourself. And then you'll look in, you look out to look in, but if you're always looking in, you'll miss everything.
Thank you so, so much for being here and for sharing your poetry and for sharing your thoughts about your poetry. And thank you, Al Munoz, for joining us as well. It's been just absolutely incredible to hear you read your work. And I'm so glad that we got to have our Zoom format poetry release.
Me too.
Different
Thank
as
you so much.
So tonight's event could not have happened without the support of my colleagues at the University of Arizona Press and our University of Arizona Libraries family. We hope to see you at our next event on Wednesday, April 21st, The Dene Reader, an anthology of Navajo literature. For more information, please visit our website at uapress.arizona.edu, where you can also purchase tonight's book and register for next week's event. Finally, thank you to all of you who joined us. The best part of publishing books like Danzirly is the opportunity to share them. I hope you all have a great rest of your evening, wherever you may be in the world. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, everyone. Love you all. Thank you. Thank you.